Look, I'm going to be real with you about what happened. Because honestly, I'm still pissed about how everything went down. I'm Scarlett. I'm 26. And this whole mess with my ex Logan is just proof that some guys can't handle a real woman who knows what she wants. We were together for 3 years. And let me tell you, those were 3 years where I was living exactly like I deserved to be living. Logan was one of those guys who actually knew how to treat a woman right, you know? He'd surprise me with expensive jewelry, take me on these amazing weekend trips to places I'd never been, and he even took cooking classes just so he could make me these elaborate dinners at home. Like, who does that? Most guys can barely microwave leftovers. He was always bringing me flowers for no reason, showing up with my favorite chocolates, and basically making sure I felt like the queen I am. And honestly, that's exactly what I expected from a relationship. Why should I settle for some lazy guy who thinks Netflix and takeout counts as romance? Logan understood that if you want to keep a woman like me happy, you have to put in the work. He'd work out religiously because he knew I deserved a man who looked good, and I'd catch him talking to his friends about how lucky he was to have me. Which, let's be honest, he was. I mean, I could have had any guy I wanted, but I chose him. That should have meant something to him. The thing is, Logan made our relationship so easy for me. If I wanted to go out with my girlfriends, he'd never question it or make me feel guilty. If I needed space to do my own thing, he'd just smile and tell me to have fun. He trusted me completely, which honestly was kind of naive if you ask me. Like, you can't just assume your girlfriend is going to be loyal without putting in effort to keep her interested, you know? But Logan seemed to think that just being a good boyfriend was enough to keep me around forever. He had this whole routine where he'd text me good morning every day, ask about my day, remember little things I mentioned in passing. It was sweet, but after 3 years it started feeling a bit predictable. Logan's best friend Bennett was always hanging around our place, and honestly, Bennett got me in ways that Logan didn't. Where Logan was all stable and reliable, Bennett had this edge to him that was actually exciting. He'd challenge me during conversations instead of just agreeing with everything I said. He'd tease me in ways that made me feel alive, not just worshipped. And yeah, there was definitely chemistry there that Logan was apparently too trusting to notice. Bennett would look at me like he was really seeing me, not just admiring me like some prize he'd won. The whole time this was building up, Logan was dealing with his car situation. His old car was basically falling apart, and his mechanic friend Chris had been telling him for months that he needed to just get rid of it because the repair costs were getting ridiculous. Logan had been saving up forever to buy something nice and reliable. He'd work extra shifts, skip going out with friends, basically sacrifice everything so he could afford this car he'd been researching obsessively. When he finally had enough saved up, you should have seen him. He was like a kid on Christmas morning, talking about all the features and the security system he was going to install. Honestly, I thought he was being a bit paranoid with all the cameras and alarms he wanted to put on it, but whatever. Boys and their toys, right? The way Logan talked about protecting his investment was almost cute, if not a little obsessive. He kept saying how this car represented all his hard work and how he wanted to make sure nothing happened to it. I remember thinking that maybe if he put half that energy into keeping our relationship exciting, things might have been different. But Logan was always more focused on his plans and his goals than on keeping me guessing. He had everything mapped out so perfectly, including me, apparently, and that kind of security just made me feel like I was suffocating. Bennett and I had been hooking up for 2 months before Logan found out, and honestly, those were some of the most exciting 2 months I'd had in years. Finally, I was with someone who didn't just hand me everything on a silver platter. Bennett made me work for his attention, made me feel like I had to earn his interest, and that was such a rush after being with someone who basically worshipped me 24/7. With Logan, I always knew exactly what I was getting. He'd text me at the same times every day, bring me coffee the way I liked it, remember every little preference I'd ever mentioned. It was nice, but it was also boring as hell. Bennett was unpredictable. Sometimes he'd be all over me, and sometimes he'd act like I barely existed. And that kept me on my toes in a way that Logan never did. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I felt guilty about it because honestly, Logan had gotten way too comfortable in our relationship. He stopped trying to impress me, stopped making me feel like he was lucky to have me, and just assumed I'd always be there no matter what. That's not how you keep a woman interested. You can't just coast on being a good guy and expect that to be enough forever. Bennett understood that relationships need excitement, need a little bit of uncertainty to stay alive. When I was with Bennett, I felt like myself again instead of just Logan's perfect girlfriend, who he'd put up on some pedestal. The sneaking around was honestly thrilling. Logan would go to work, thinking everything was fine, and I'd have Bennett over, or we'd meet up somewhere Logan would never think to look. It felt like I was finally living again, instead of just existing in this comfortable but stifling bubble that Logan had created for us. Bennett didn't want to change me or make me into his ideal girlfriend. He liked me exactly as I was, including the parts of me that were a little wild and unpredictable. Logan always acted like I was this precious thing he needed to protect and cherish, but Bennett saw me as an equal who could handle myself. The whole thing came crashing down on a Tuesday when Logan came home early from work. I had texted him earlier asking when he'd be home, and he'd said his usual time, so I figured Bennett and I had at least 2 more hours. But apparently Logan had finished his project early and decided to surprise me by coming home to cook dinner together. Instead, he walked in on me and Bennett on our couch, and the look on his face was something I'll never forget. Not because I felt bad, but because I was so annoyed that he couldn't have just stuck to his schedule like he always did. I mean, the one time Logan decides to be spontaneous, and it had to be that day, the whole thing could have been avoided if he'd just stayed at work like he was supposed to. What really threw me off was Logan's reaction. I was expecting him to yell, to demand explanations, to fight for our relationship like any normal person would. Instead, he just stood there for a minute, looked at both of us, and said, "We're done, Scarlett. I'll get my stuff later." Then he just walked out. No drama, no begging, no tears. Nothing. That actually made me angrier than if he'd screamed at me, because at least then I would have known that our 3 years together meant something to him. His calm reaction made me feel like maybe I'd never been as important to him as I thought, and that was honestly insulting. Bennett left pretty quickly after that, mumbling something about how he didn't know Logan would be home early, and suddenly I was sitting there alone, realizing that maybe I'd just lost the best thing that had ever happened to me. But not because I missed Logan exactly, more because I was starting to understand that his reaction meant he really was done with me, and nobody had ever just walked away from me like that before. For 2 months after Logan left, I tried everything I could think of to get his attention. I started with the normal stuff like texting and calling, but he had blocked my number within a week. So I got creative. I made fake social media accounts just to see what he was posting. And let me tell you, watching him live his life like nothing had happened was infuriating. He wasn't posting sad songs or cryptic quotes about heartbreak. He wasn't looking miserable in photos. He was just existing normally, which honestly felt like a slap in the face. I had given him 3 years of my life, and he was acting like I'd never existed. I convinced my girlfriends to text him for me, made up stories about needing closure or wanting to return his things, anything to get him to respond. But Logan wouldn't engage with any of it. He ignored every message, every attempt at contact, every friend who reached out on my behalf. It was like he'd just erased me from his life completely. The more he ignored me, the angrier I got. I deserved an explanation. I deserved the chance to tell my side of the story. I deserved for him to at least acknowledge that what we had was real before he just threw it all away. But Logan was being stubborn and childish, refusing to have an adult conversation about what happened. In my mind, if he really loved me the way he claimed to, he would have fought harder to understand why I did what I did, instead of just giving up on us. During this time, Logan bought his new car, the one he'd been saving for throughout our entire relationship, talking about it constantly, like it was going to change his life or something. When I saw photos of it through my fake accounts, I felt sick. Here he was, dropping serious money on this fancy car with all its security features and backup cameras, acting like he was celebrating his freedom from me. The car became this symbol of everything that was wrong with how he was handling our breakup. Instead of investing that energy into fixing our relationship, he was buying toys and moving on like I meant nothing. The car was beautiful. I'll give him that. Sleek and expensive looking. Exactly the kind of thing Logan had always dreamed about. But seeing him so happy with it, posting photos and talking about finally having reliable transportation, made me realize that he really wasn't coming back. This wasn't some phase he was going through. He wasn't playing hard to get or trying to make me jealous. He was genuinely moving on with his life, and that car was proof that he was doing just fine without me. What really got to me was how he'd installed all these security measures on it. Cameras, alarms, the whole setup. It felt personal, like he was protecting himself from me specifically. Like he thought I was some kind of threat that he needed to guard against. That hurt more than I want to admit, because it meant he really saw me as someone dangerous rather than someone who loved him and made a mistake. The fact that he felt the need to protect his precious car from me was honestly insulting. I'm not some crazy ex who goes around destroying property. I'm a grown woman who just wanted to talk to the man I'd spent 3 years with. I didn't plan to destroy Logan's car. It just happened. I was driving past his apartment complex one morning, not even thinking about stopping, when I saw it sitting there in the parking lot, looking all perfect and shiny. And something inside me just snapped. Here was this thing that Logan cared about more than he'd ever cared about fixing our relationship. This car that represented his new life without me, his ability to just move on like our 3 years together, meant nothing. So I decided that if he wanted to ignore me and pretend I didn't exist, maybe damaging something he actually cared about would get his attention. I went home and grabbed some tools from the garage. A hammer, some keys, a screwdriver. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just angry and hurt and tired of being dismissed. When I got back to his parking lot, I started with the windows. The sound of the glass breaking was actually satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. Each crack felt like I was finally getting Logan to pay attention to me, even if it wasn't the way I wanted. I keyed the paint job next. Long scratches down the sides that spelled out how I was feeling without having to use words. The whole time I was doing it, I kept thinking about how Logan would react when he found it. Maybe he'd finally realize that ignoring me wasn't working and that we needed to have a real conversation about what happened between us. I managed to get the doors open and mess up the interior too. Ripped the seats, broke some of the dashboard components, basically made sure the car was totaled. It felt like justice in a weird way. Logan had destroyed our relationship by refusing to forgive me or work things out, so now something he cared about was destroyed too. Maybe he'd understand how it felt to lose something important without getting a choice in the matter. Before I left, I wrote a note and put it on the windshield. Please, I just want to talk to you. Because that's really all I wanted. I wasn't trying to get back together or anything crazy like that. I just wanted him to acknowledge what we'd had and give me the closure I deserved. The note was my way of explaining that this wasn't random violence, it was communication. If Logan would just agree to meet me for coffee and have one honest conversation about everything, none of this would have been necessary. I thought I was being smart about covering my tracks. I had worn gloves and made sure to break the security cameras first thing. Logan was always going on about how protected his car was, but I'm not stupid. I knew where the obvious cameras were, and I took care of them before I did anything else. In my mind, there was no way he could prove I was the one who did it, so he'd have no choice but to just accept my olive branch and finally talk to me. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes, and when I was done, I actually felt better than I had in weeks. Finally, I'd done something that would make Logan understand how serious I was about working things out between us. He couldn't ignore a gesture this big. 3 days later, I got papers delivered to my apartment. Legal documents charging me with vandalism and destruction of property. I couldn't believe Logan had actually called the police instead of just calling me to talk. When I read through the paperwork, I found out that Logan had backup security cameras that I hadn't known about, hidden ones that had recorded everything I did. I felt so stupid and betrayed, like Logan had set me up somehow. How was I supposed to know he'd been that paranoid about protecting his car? The timing couldn't have been worse because I had a job interview scheduled for the following week. A really good position that I'd been working toward for months, and I knew that having criminal charges on my record would ruin any chance I had of getting hired. So I did what any reasonable person would do and tried to contact Logan to work things out before this got out of hand. I got new phone numbers, had friends call him, even tried reaching out through his work. Every message was the same. I explained that I understood he was upset, but involving the police was taking things too far. I promised that if he would just meet with me one time to talk about everything, I would never contact him again. I offered to pay for the car repairs, to do whatever he wanted to make things right between us. But Logan wouldn't respond to anything. He was being completely unreasonable, treating me like some kind of criminal instead of someone who'd shared 3 years of her life with him. I couldn't understand how someone could be so cold and unforgiving. Everyone makes mistakes. And the fact that Logan wasn't willing to show me any mercy proved that he'd never really loved me the way I thought he did. I started telling people about what was happening, hoping that mutual friends would talk sense into him. But instead of supporting me, most of them acted like I was the one being unreasonable. They couldn't understand that Logan was being vindictive and cruel by pursuing legal action instead of just handling this between us like adults. I tried explaining that I was only acting out because he'd refused to give me closure, but people kept acting like destroying his car was some kind of unforgivable crime. The stress of the whole situation was destroying me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything, and the job interview that was supposed to change my life was getting closer every day. Logan had the power to fix everything by just dropping the charges and agreeing to have one conversation with me. But he was choosing to ruin my future instead. It felt like he was getting revenge for what happened with Bennett, using the legal system to punish me in a way that would have lasting consequences on my career and my life. I kept thinking that if Logan would just remember how good we were together, how much I'd meant to him during our 3 years, he'd realize that this whole thing had gotten out of hand, and we needed to find a way to move past it together. The job interview was a disaster. Even though the charges hadn't been resolved yet, word had somehow gotten around in my professional circle about what I'd done. The interviewer was polite but distant, and I could tell they'd already made up their mind before I even sat down. I didn't get the job, obviously, and worse than that, other opportunities started drying up too. People talk in every industry, and apparently I was now known as the woman who'd destroyed her ex's car. My reputation was ruined over one moment of poor judgment, and Logan still wouldn't even talk to me about working something out. But that was just the beginning. A few months later, I found out through social media that Logan was dating someone new. Some girl who worked in his building, apparently. They looked happy in the photos I could see through my fake accounts, and it made me physically sick to watch. This woman was nothing special from what I could tell. Just average-looking and basic, but Logan was smiling in their pictures, the way he used to smile with me in the beginning. Seeing him move on so completely while I was still dealing with the legal consequences of our breakup was like a knife in my chest. The worst part was watching how normal and healthy their relationship looked. She didn't seem to need constant gifts or grand gestures to feel loved. In their photos, they looked like equals, like partners, not like one person worshiping the other. It made me realize that maybe Logan had learned something from our relationship about what he actually wanted. But instead of giving me the chance to grow and change too, he just replaced me with someone who was apparently better suited to his boring, stable lifestyle. The criminal charges ended up costing me thousands in fines and legal fees, plus community service that was humiliating and time-consuming. But the social consequences were even worse. Friends who had tolerated my drama before started distancing themselves once they understood the full scope of what I'd done. People began seeing through the victim narrative I'd been telling and started questioning whether maybe Logan had good reasons for cutting me off so completely. Even Bennett, who I'd thought would at least be supportive since we'd been involved, wanted nothing to do with me once he realized how unstable I'd become after the breakup. My dating life became non-existent because guys would hear about what I'd done and decide I was too much drama to deal with. Logan's new girlfriends seemed to bring out the best in him. In their photos, he looked relaxed and genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen before. They went on normal dates, did everyday things together, and seemed to have the kind of easy, comfortable relationship that I'd always thought was boring. But watching from the outside, I started to understand that maybe what I'd seen as Logan being complacent was actually him being secure and confident in what we had. The problem was that I'd needed chaos and uncertainty to feel alive, and Logan had needed peace and stability to thrive. We were fundamentally incompatible. But instead of recognizing that and ending things maturely, I'd cheated, and then destroyed his property when he wouldn't let me back into his life. Even as everything fell apart around me, I couldn't bring myself to admit that I'd been wrong. Logan's refusal to forgive me still felt cruel and unwarranted. His ability to move on and find happiness with someone else still felt like proof that our relationship had never meant as much to him as it had to me. In my mind, I was still the victim of his coldness and his new girlfriend's perfect act that I was sure wouldn't last. I spent way too much time checking his social media, watching him build this great life while I dealt with the consequences of my choices. But I convinced myself that I was just unlucky to have been involved with someone as heartless as Logan, someone who could throw away 3 years over one mistake and then rub his happiness in my face by posting about it online.